Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven, and I'm happy to have my guest here today, Karen Stabiner. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome to the PR Maven Podcast. And the podcast is all about personal branding and public relations. And personal branding is what makes you stand out from everyone else who does the same thing that you do. And it also helps differentiate you and in the marketplace. So we talk about personal branding and public relations on the podcast. And Karen recently wrote an article in the New York Times, which caught our interest. Actually, everyone on my team discussed the article because it related to the difference between journalism and influencers. And we work with both journalists and influencers. But before we jump in, I'm going to introduce Karen. She was the West Coast editor of The Counter, a nonprofit digital newsroom, until its untimely demise in May of 2022. And her work contributed to a 2021 SABEW Award for General Excellence. Now, Karen, is that SABU or is it SABEW?
You got me. I have no idea. We pronounced it Sabu just because it's quicker. I don't know.
Sabu. Okay. Well, while the dignified label for what she does is narrative nonfiction or immersion journalism, she prefers to think of herself as a fly on the wall. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and many others. And that's a very impressive list, Karen. So I'm very honored to have you on the show today. And you've also been the founder of an alternative newspaper in Santa Barbara, California, and graduated from the University of Michigan.
So I'll just toss in, wrote a bunch of books in between.
Oh, well, there.
Yeah.
Well, and you spent 10 years as adjunct professor in the MS program at Columbia University Journalism School, where she created a class in food writing and taught reporting and feature writing. The author of Generation Chef, To Dance with the Devil, The New War on Breast Cancer, and My Girl, Adventures with a Teen in Training. She's also written 2 cookbooks and 2 novels. So, wow, that's quite a career you've had, Karen. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So tell us about your career and how you got into journalism in the first place.
My 8th grade teacher told me I was a good writer and I ought to work on the high school newspaper. And when you're that age, the notion that you can do anything well is pretty thrilling. My high school, I went to a big school outside of Chicago, had a serious faculty advisor with a serious agenda. And that was really where I learned how to put my curiosity to good use. And I've followed it ever since. I think it's a marvelous profession. It does give you the chance to walk into any room and ask anybody a question about anything. And it's sort of a continuing education, or at least it has been for me.
Well, that's interesting on multiple levels, in that I feel like teachers can have such an influence on you, both positive and negative. And in my school career, I experienced both. I experienced teachers who lifted me up, and I also experienced teachers that were trying to suppress me because I was always very ebullient and enthusiastic. And sometimes they just wanted to put me in the corner and shut me up. So
Right.
I'm glad that 8th grade teacher spotted your talent and helped encourage you. And you've done a lot of food writing, which of course people must think is so glamorous and so exciting and fun. Where did you get interested in food and restaurants?
Well, I keep delving into the past. My family owned a little restaurant supply company outside in Chicago. And so I had this very odd childhood where I spent a lot of time in restaurants that owed my father money. Um, and I think that I came really to love restaurants on some completely irrational level because they represented everything my neighborhood was not. They all came from different places. They all had interesting stories to tell. It was where you went to relax and have fun and feel part of a larger community. So I've been interested in restaurants and food forever. And I always used to write about it sort of on the side. And then I think in the last 10 years or 15 years, as the industry became really interesting and issues bubbled up that had nothing to do with what was on your plate, I thought this would be a good focus. This is something I come to with a lot of background and a lot of passion. So I sort of narrowed my field a little bit.
Right. So if these restaurants owed your father money, maybe when you and he showed up, they tried to feed you to make your father not so mad with them, would they?
Oh, it was more formal than that. I mean, certainly they were always glad to see me, and I only understood later that there was a reason that there might be a birthday cake with my name on it. But no, the deal was that something came off the bill toward their bill. It was business. It was not just they were trying to make him like them. I don't know ever what the terms of the deal were, but they helped to pay their bill by feeding us.
Yeah. Although unfortunately those meals probably didn't help pay the heating bill or your
Or the rent. Right.
Rent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tough one. So you've translated your love of restaurants and various ethnic dining into cooking. And are you also a home chef? Like, do you do a lot of cooking at home?
I'm an extremely good baker. I'm a good cook. I mean, yes, I do cook at home, and I love to cook again for that community, whether it's friends of mine or my daughter and her friends. Yeah. I was known for going up to Columbia with a pie and good plates and real forks and cloth napkins, just so some of the faculty members could get together and have a moment. Yeah, I like the ritual.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also I know how to put on a lobster feed, for example, for a large group, and I have 2 sons, and they like to bring their friends, and I feed them all lobster and corn and pie and salad.
What time should I show up?
Yeah, please do. Please come. It's across country. You're in California, right? So
yeah.
You'll have to come to Maine.
Okay.
But also, one of the fun facts about my background, I grew up in the 4-H, and I was in the kind of 4-H that did like home economics. And I learned to bake also, and I was the Connecticut State bread baking champion when I was 17.
I stand in awe. I have never won a prize for my cooking.
Well, I haven't been baking bread lately, but I should get back into that.
You should. You owe it to your public.
That's right, my public, right. So now is the crux of this episode, which is the difference between an influencer and a journalist. And this is, I don't think the general public really understand the difference between someone who has a large audience because they're an influencer and they have an audience because they're in a credible publication. So do you want to talk about that?
I can't tell you how much that sentence scares me. What you just said. To start at the bottom, Journalists do not swap coverage for goods or money. Influencers' economy is based on swapping goods for coverage. It's a fundamental distinction. I saw a restaurant owner refer to someone as a journalist who came to visit, and I looked at the post, and it was an influencer. And the fact that this person could not tell the difference was very troubling, because here's the deal, and I used to talk to students about this all the time. Avoiding conflict of interest is one of the fundamentals of being a journalist. There are rules at various publications about what you can and cannot responsibly do. Here's why. If I go to your restaurant and you feed me and pour wine for me and do not charge me, and I write something positive about you, it's because you've given me something and we are bartering. But if I write something negative about you, people will say that I'm doing it to overcompensate for the fact that you gave me something. So either way you go at it, as soon as an influencer accepts free goods, they've lost their credibility. If a journalist always stands at a distance in terms of that, then we are responsible only to ourselves and our publication. And I have to say, when you look at most influencer, I'll put coverage in quotes, I feel very strongly about this. It's all positive. You know, that's the other term of the negotiation. If I'm going to feed you and open a bottle for you, I expect you to say something nice about me. At the bottom of that, you see influencers. I saw one yesterday who literally go to a restaurant and just post a picture of the food. No copy, not even, oh, this was delicious, just a picture of the food. Now, at the upper echelon, to be fair, I am nothing if not fair, I know an influencer who has a background in food, is very knowledgeable, makes her money through product sponsorships, but will not take money from the restaurants she writes about. She pays for her meals. So that's a sort of interesting hybrid, but there's no way that you, the consumer, can tell. There's no stamp of approval that so-and-so did not pay for her meal. And when I started to hear about ways in which influencers are abusing that relationship at a time when restaurants are hardly solid on their feet, I thought somebody has to call this out for what it is. It is not journalism. It is not reportage. For better or worse, it's advertising. And we have no idea as well about the credibility of the person who's doing the advertising. I mean, we were talking about high school before. It's like the popular girl in class or the popular boy in class. Why are they popular? Are they popular for any reason that matters to you? Or are they popular because of things that you don't care about? When you see an influencer post on Instagram, you don't know why they have all those followers. It may have nothing to do, in this case, with food.
Right. And they may not even be real humans. They may be bots. That's another thing.
And their followers may be bots. I mean, I talked to a restaurateur who now has a series of filters that she imposes. One of them, there are ways you can try to find out if follower numbers are real, because often they aren't. So if someone blows in and says, I have 250,000 followers, she's going to do her homework and see if she can figure that out. The more insidious one was the person who called her up and said, oh, I came to your restaurant. I had a wonderful meal with my friends. If I could come back and you would comp me a meal, then I would write about you. And the owner asked her which dishes she liked the best. And one of the dishes she went on and on about was a cooked halibut. It was done perfectly. She was rhapsodic about this beautiful cooked halibut, except the restaurant doesn't serve cooked halibut. It has a lot of raw dishes. So as soon as she started going on about a non-existent dish, the owner said, thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah. Well, do you have advice for restaurant owners on how to respond when they're approached by an influencer?
Well, I think it's best to go to them. Another one said to me, and I thought this was a good idea. And it's in the piece in the New York Times if people want to look at it. When an influencer he doesn't know approaches him and says, I would love to come in and have a meal for free and write about your place, he says, why don't you come in first on your own dime? See what you think about the experience as a regular customer. And if you enjoy it, then we'll talk. Because he knows that if they turn him down, they're fakes.
Right.
Okay? So that's one thing you can do. You can try to check the numbers. You can use your own evaluative skills. We're all intelligent people here. If an influencer approaches you and you look at their posts and they're simply a pretty picture, you have to ask yourself, is this even going to cut through the noise? If in fact, like the woman I mentioned, they write a little post that reflects their understanding of food and different cuisines and has some depth to it, then maybe that's someone you want to talk to. But I'm starting to wonder, frankly, since the world is so full of influencers without credibility, if there might at some point be a backlash. If enough restaurateurs feel fed up enough, do they do something else to get attention?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I should say I also know another restaurateur who really works hard with legacy media because, again, reporters have no responsibility only to compliment you, but they're wondering if a more in-depth look might stand out from the crowd, might break through the noise a little bit and get the kinds of customers who become regulars to pay attention. Right.
Well, we haven't really mentioned the word ethics or integrity. And journalists have established ethics. Do you want to talk about that since you have taught journalism?
Well, about journalistic ethics?
Yes.
Sure. And I should say, one of the things to me that is exciting about journalism, that gives it a dynamism, is that you have to do what you do within a set of formal constraints. You can't just say anything about anybody. It's not whatever the traffic will bear. It's a discipline. And I have tremendous respect for it. So, the first step of ethical behavior is you don't take anything from anybody. I found that my students, because this is a younger generation that grew up in a different universe, would want to know, well, there must be something that's okay. Isn't coffee okay? Or isn't lunch okay? Where is the line? And if you're going to be hardline about it, which has its own rewards, you can't look for a line because everybody's definition of a line is different. You might know in your heart that you're not going to change your coverage because somebody bought you a hamburger. But someone else can say, well, of course, that's what she wrote. Someone bought her a hamburger. So it's just easier on some level not to put your foot in that water at all. I say that understanding that the world of freelance journalism has changed drastically and for the worse since I was coming up. Publications don't cover expenses. Publications don't pay the fees they used to pay. And I understand a young freelance journalist saying, well, how am I supposed to make a living? But I think the answer has to be something other than entering into a barter relationship with your subjects.
Right.
Other ethical issues, you have a responsibility to ask enough questions, to ask follow-up questions, to be responsible in the depth of your coverage. That also is challenging right now. I had an editor ask me honestly, why would he want to assign a full-length feature about something when he could just run one of his normal 200-word announcements? And my answer was, well, because the world is deeper than that, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. Look, it's not easy. But in the end, you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you have worked for your publication and for yourself, and you've maintained a sense of integrity. You don't let people see your copy in advance. I was stunned recently. I wrote a feature, and someone didn't ask me if they could see it. They asked me when they could see it. And I had to take a moment and explain why that's not okay. But I have a feeling that in the world of influencers, again, it's a very porous barrier. It's not like it is in the world of journalism.
Yes, and I believe that many journalists are now getting rewarded by their media companies for having large audiences on social media. So the lines have blurred, because I know some TV reporters who say that they get financial incentives from their TV stations if they get a lot of likes on their social media posts.
Oh, I mean, I don't know people who actually get paid for it, but I know that there is tremendous pressure to have eyeballs. The new compliment when you write a piece is it got great traffic.
Right.
And look, publications have been going after readers since they were chiseling words on stone. You know, subscriptions were always important. I don't think that was then and this is now. I think it's a continuum, but I think it's a dangerous continuum. I'm always a little bit unsettled now when I see sort of every publication I look at has a little thing at the top that says 3-minute read. My essay on influencers for the New York Times was a 5-minute read. And, you know, there's a piece in there that I really want to read this week that's a 25-minute read. And you and I both know some people are going to look at that and never click on the story.
Right, exactly.
So everyone's looking for readers. We are not nonprofits. I mean, as I learned firsthand, nonprofit journalism is not necessarily working out to be the solution we thought it was going to be. But there have to be places that you will not go past. I mean,
right.
I don't know, again, about compensating people for their social media followings, but if you're going to do that and you can still hew to notions of what proper journalism is, because honestly, paying somebody for a lot of followers is not saying go out and compromise yourself. It's saying you're coming up with great stories everybody wants to look at, and maybe there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Well, this is fascinating, Karen. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back with more. But I'm so intrigued by this topic, and I'm so glad that you responded when I reached out after reading your article to see if you would join me here. So thank you. And we'll be back with more from Karen in a few minutes here. But if you want to win a copy of the first chapter of my book, which is called Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand, go to prmaven.com/giveaway and sign up for our email list to receive the first chapter. And we'll be back with more from Karen in just a moment.
Sprague & Curtis is a locally owned real estate company. We're primarily focused in Central Maine. I got excited about Nancy's book because she's so well known in the area for her marketing and branding techniques, and we're always looking to expand and learn and grow. And so a lot of us here at the office decided that we wanted to read her book and learn some new techniques.
It benefits Sprague & Curtis to have a large brand and audience because there can often be multiple years between transactions with clients. So it's important to network with them and stay in touch with them in those in-between periods. And this book really helped us learn some techniques and methods to continue to do that. We organized a small book group with Nancy's book with brokers in our office this winter to share information and remind ourselves how important it is to always be working on our network and continually reaching out to our customers.
Platforms like social media are important in expanding your business, but equally as important are handwritten notes, cards, letters. She inspired me to send her a note of appreciation, just thanking her for the book and her insight. In reading Nancy's book, I was excited to look to continue to grow our brand and our audience. I think she does a great job of motivating us.
Nancy's book really helped me learn a few things in marketing and branding and how important it is to stay on top of reaching out to clients periodically, staying top of mind, providing useful information, and really telling our story as a company.
I want to thank my friends at Sprague and Curtis for making that wonderful video, and also remind you, if you'd like to get a free chapter of that book, you just go to prmaven.com/giveaway. So welcome back to my riveting conversation with Karen Stabiner on the PR Maven Podcast. And the podcast is available on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So Karen, some influencers have had a positive impact on the restaurant industry. Do you know of any influencers who have actually helped spread the word about restaurants?
I feel so old school. The woman I spoke about, the one who really has a background, she was a caterer, she's written about food, she knows what she's talking about, and she takes the time to include some information. I mean, one of the people in the New York Times essay spoke about the current situation as a two-tier setup, and I think that's probably true. There were people who started out wanting to be influencers, who have a background in food, who know what they're talking about, who take it seriously. I still struggle mightily with the barter setup, but at least they're informative. The lower echelon, as he referred to it, or the Wild West, as someone else referred to it, is basically, I'm going to sound harsh, opportunists with a cell phone camera. You know, I loved the graphic that the Times created to run with my essay, which moved. It was animated, and there was a sweating chef and someone with an enormous cell phone, and the flash kept going off. And the truth is, you can go into restaurants sometimes and feel as though you're on the red carpet because you're eating your dinner and trying to talk to your friends, and everybody else is taking cell phone photos. So there's no one I follow, to be honest. If I'm curious about a new restaurant, I know people in the industry. My daughter's in the industry. So I will ask her or some of her friends or a communications person I like working with. But I really, having spent my life with a certain set, of guidelines that I respect, I find I can't really rely on people I can't evaluate. You know?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting you talk about the sweating chef, because as a PR agency, we have worked with restaurants and chefs, and all of a sudden, instead of chefs just focusing on their cooking, they also need to become personalities. And some of the most successful chefs are also good on camera. I think of, in Portland, Maine, we have Chef Matt Ginn, who won the Chopped Championship on Chopped Kitchen 2 times. And he's very handsome and very charming and charismatic. He's a very good chef also. So he checks both boxes, but not all chefs are necessarily.
Well, isn't that true in many, many, many professions?
Right.
If you are photogenic and charming, you're a step ahead of someone who's very awkward and self-conscious. Shouldn't have anything to do with anything, but unfortunately it does. And honestly, what you're saying speaks to the role of influencers. Pretty pictures, you know, nicely lit, the food is beautifully arranged, but to torture the analogy, there are chefs out there, I know them in LA, who are just not good at the public persona part of it. But I would eat their food any day of the week. Right. Yeah. So I worry a little bit, again, journalism gives the reader, the customer, the diner, an opportunity to take in some information and judge for themselves. Okay?
Right.
The kind of influencing that is kind of running rampant at the moment is just image, pretty picture. There's no depth to it.
Right.
And again, you don't know where it's coming from. I mean, when I look at my news feed every day, there are publications I know and trust.
Right.
There are publications I've never heard of in my life, and maybe I'll give them a try, but I'm not going to stick with them if I don't see the kind of responsible coverage that I think is, really in a risky spot at the moment, and we're helping to propel ourselves away from it, which is not a good thing.
Well, you just mentioned two words that I use a lot. You said know and trust, and I would add the word like too. So it's just the same with a person or a restaurant or any brand. If someone knows, likes, and trusts you, they're more willing to do business with you. And I guess influencers are probably in the same category, that if they have large audiences of people that know, like, and trust them, then they are going to have more influence over them. So,
yeah, I mean, as I said to you when you asked me to come on, this is a little bit of loggerheads, because I know that you work with influencers and the world at large works with influencers, and I am taking like the traditional journalist stance, but it can't be good for us as a culture to settle for less information from people we don't know and trust. I don't care if we like them or not, but
right.
Know and trust.
Right.
And as I pointed out in the piece, and there have been studies written about this, the other danger here is the more that we turn to an Instagram post rather than the 9-minute read,
right,
the less we are able to process the 9-minute read. The brain is a muscle. If the brain is only doing sprints, it's harder to do a marathon. And then you convince yourself you don't need to do the marathon. And then before you know it, and that's an apocalyptic vision, but I think it's, to be responsible, we have to look at it. Someone said to me a few days ago, nobody's reading books anymore. And I thought, what a terrifying notion. Not just because you're missing the in-depthness of it, but because maintaining your focus long enough to read a book is a different physical activity than checking your phone for Instagram posts. It can't be a good idea. And it kind of makes me sad that people are prepared to settle for that little. I mean, really, do you want to make life choices based on a photo and a short caption? I don't.
Absolutely. And, I'm such a big advocate of reading and libraries and literature for all ages. So I'm with you. Karen, how do shakedown influencers impact real influencers? And what are shakedown influencers?
Well, the story that prompted me to write the essay was from an owner of a relatively new restaurant, really hardworking, lovely woman. And she was approached by an influencer with 6 figures, a lot of numbers, okay, who said, I would like to write about your restaurant in exchange for a dinner for 4, food and wine. And the owner said she felt uncomfortable, but she really needed the exposure. So she said, all right, look, I'm going to set a $1 cap, because who knows what these people are going to order, right? I'm going to set a $1 cap. And if that's okay with you, I will comp you up to that amount and you'll be responsible for the rest. Okay. Woman came in with her party of 4, ate and drank like crazy. Multiple bottles of really nice wine. The owner was not at the restaurant that night. Walked out without paying the check. And here's the heartbreaker, to me, even worse. Walked out without tipping the server, who is not part of the transaction, right?
Right.
The server isn't comped. The owner is not going to pay the server a tip.
Right.
And when the owner came in the next morning and saw what had happened, she reached out to the influencer very diplomatically, right? And said, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry, but here's the overage amount. How would you like to settle up? And I'm sure you just forgot to tip the server." And the woman responded that she would like the owner simply to waive the overage and the tip. And when the owner came back and essentially said, again, very politely, "Those were not the terms we agreed to, and I really can't do that," the influencer ghosted her.
And didn't post anything.
And didn't post. And I have seen, when I was researching the Times essay, I have seen stories around the country. People who order stuff for free, desperate restaurateurs say, "Sure, I'm going to get you all this takeout barbecue." They take the money and run. They take the food and run, and they never post anything.
It's theft, really. I mean, when you think about it, it's
well, and that's funny you say that, because the interesting thing, when the piece ran, there were hundreds of comments, and several of them said the same thing. They said, according to IRS rules, free meals are income and need to be declared on your income tax return. And the commenters were basically willing to bet a free meal that nobody was declaring this stuff. And I have no idea, but it sounds like a good hunch to me.
right.
The problem also, there is no regulation of this kind of media, as there is of other media. So you can do whatever you can get away with. Why not why not give it a try? You're 24 years old, you like to eat and drink, you have friends, you're in this sort of gig mentality. What's the worst thing that can happen? A restaurant will turn you down, and then you can go on to the next one.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, that's the problem right now for, I'm not going to call it a profession, for the activity known as influencing. For people who are trying to do it in a decent and responsible way, as much as is possible, that you've got these bandits out there.
Right.
And preying on a really vulnerable industry.
Right.
Restaurants are still coming out of the pandemic. I'm sure they're looking at the summer numbers about an uptick and just sweating. They're dealing with new legislation about outdoor dining. The neighborhood that I live in California had a beautiful street full of, we call them parklets, right? Outdoor. And it brought the street to life, and it drew the community. It was just heaven. And once the government announced that the pandemic was officially over, the city came in and said, "Okay, we're going to charge you $1,500 for every new seat." And so 3/4 of the restaurants pulled up their outdoor dining spaces in a city where we can dine out, 320 days of the year. Restaurants still need all the help and support they can get while they try to figure out their new business model, how they can stay alive, how they can deal with the chronic issue of landlords and renewed leases with increased rents. They have enough on their plate. It's sad to see some people trying to take advantage of them.
Absolutely. Well, can you imagine a time when influencers and journalists become the same, or do you think they will always be different?
When you sent me that question, I thought, I guess I'm glad I'm not 20, because if that time is coming, I don't want to see it. I have to be an optimist because I believe that there is a core of people who are hungry for information. The current dean of the Columbia Journalism School just joined the board of directors of a group whose mandate is to improve local journalism, because they feel that that's sort of the future of the profession. I have former students spread out actually all over the globe, not just all over the country, who are old school journalists in young clothing, sorry for the noise, who still hew to those basic notions of professional behavior. Do I worry about it sometimes in the middle of the night when I've got nothing else to do? Sure. Sure. It's what I like most about journalists as people is that we are pain in the neck curious.
Yeah.
Okay. There's always something else we want to know. And we take pride in figuring out how to present it in a way that people can absorb and appreciate. And if you want to start with Watergate, just to start somewhere and to step away from restaurants for a minute, it's that dogged professionalism and curiosity that at many points in our history have changed the course of history for the better. If not for journalists, there would be no Watergate. If not for journalists, there would be no Me Too. If not for journalists, I think you can argue there would be less of what's going on with Donald Trump right now. We are not
happy if there were no journalists.
Yeah, I mean, we are not fun to deal with because we don't always play nicely.
That's right.
But I have always thought, and I think I'm probably a little romantic about journalism, but that's okay. I have always thought that it is our job to stand in for all the people who need to know things with our notebooks or our recorders or whatever, walk to the front, ask some pushy questions, get some useful answers. And, when I write about restaurants, I do not write about the latest trend in wrap sandwiches or really the latest anything. I try to write about them as part of our culture. There's a wonderful phrase, I'm sure you've heard it, the third place.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
For those, if anyone listening hasn't, the first two places are home and work. The essential third place is any entity in the community that brings us together outside of our little nest of home and work, allows us to communicate with other people. And restaurants are at the head of the short list of places like that.
Right.
They are not, it pains me sometimes to see one trend piece after another because there is so much more going on than that.
Absolutely.
I walk into restaurants now and see other customers I recognize because I pride myself on being a regular, and so do they.
Yeah.
So I am hopeful that there will never be a time, how's that for an awkward sentence, when the two overlap and become one. I think it's not healthy for us.
I also feel like journalists need PR. I feel like journalism as a field needs to educate the public as to the difference between themselves and influencers.
I think that's true because I think we go in waves, during Watergate, again, we were heroes. We were just the best people on the planet.
Right.
Lately, tragically, we're sort of in a kill the messenger mode, and too often it's the journalist who's the problem and not what they're writing about.
Right.
That's like a nice, cheap, easy line of attack. I think it's true. I think there are things about what we do that are valuable and lasting and really a contribution. We're not the bad guys just because we told you that the numbers are going up. We're not the bad guys because I'm not the bad guy because I wrote an essay saying there are influencers out there who are scamming restaurants and we're all paying for it. That's important to think about, whether you go back to using the ones you've always paid attention to, or you go back and curate your list, or maybe you go back and say, I'm going to take a health break from food influencers for a month and see how I feel at the end.
Right.
I am a journalist. I'm also a consumer of information, and we need to take a moment and reflect on where we're getting our information and what the source is and what the quality of it is and whether we wouldn't like a little more. Influencers are like a snack.
That's a very quotable quote.
Just came to me.
That's awesome. So Karen, is there a book, an app, or a podcast that has influenced you in your life and your career?
Oh my. Probably books, because the point at which I was most easily influenced, there were books, sometimes movies. And I read a lot of fiction because I like that to inform how I write. When I say I write narrative nonfiction, I tell stories that happen to be true, you know. It's a very good question. I mean, I could say The Great Gatsby and you'll all write me off as a nutcase, but I do think this. I think that information is most easily absorbed when it's told as a story, when there's a narrative. I also used to tell my students, when our children are young, most of us, we don't really sit them down and say, here are the 6 attributes you need to have. What do? We read them a book.
Right, absolutely.
We read them Charlotte's Web, and that's how they learn about family and grief and tenacity and love and all of that. And so when I write, I try to borrow from that storytelling.
Absolutely.
Once upon a time, there were influencers who roamed the earth, and restaurants cowered in a corner and wondered what will become of me. So I think maybe a slightly fanciful answer like that should suffice. I think the important thing actually is for all of us to read outside our comfort zone. I will just say, I just finished reading the Oppenheimer biography because I saw the film and I wanted to know more. And about halfway through, I thought, I don't read books like this. Historical biography. This is a great thing for me to do because, as I said before, it's kind of stretching my brain in ways it doesn't usually move. So rather than a single, book or podcast or app?
Yes, or an app, yeah.
I think maybe read anything that's more than a 5-minute read.
Yeah, good. Absolutely, I agree.
Down. Yeah.
I agree.
And then talk to somebody about it.
Right, absolutely. In the third place.
That's right. Over a lovely meal without your phones out.
Right, exactly. Yes, good point. Yes, parents should encourage their kids to put these phones away at the dinner table.
Right. There used to be rules. I don't know if Danny Meyer at Gramercy Tavern, when cell phones first became ubiquitous, there used to be a sign at Gramercy Tavern, cell phones not allowed in the restaurant.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good idea too.
It is a good idea. It's hard for people, but it's a good idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Karen, we're going to link to your story in our show notes. And if people want to connect with you, what social media are you active on?
I'm on Instagram. Yeah, and it's just K Stabiner. And I have a website, which is simply KarenStabiner.com. Okay. And they can also reach me there. Thanks for putting that up. I mean, I'm on Twitter. I don't look at Facebook. And honestly, Twitter is the slowest way to find me. So I would say Instagram. Often they're very lovely pictures of pies, because I sort of believe that's my philosophy of life, a good pie.
Nice.
And the website, there's an email on the website. And I hope that people will reach out to me with opinions because as a curious journalist, I'm always interested in hearing another point of view.
Oh, good. Well, I hope you'll hear from members of PR Maven Nation.
Please. Good. Okay.
So, thank you so much. I know it's early for you and you had some issues with the weather this week.
I'm sorry for those of you who can hear the noise. They are literally trying to dry out the new roof before the next storm.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, so are we.
Yeah.
But there's no climate change. Don't worry about it, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a whole other episode. So if you have any questions for our guests, you can connect with Karen, or if you'd like to talk to me. Nancy at prmaven.com is my email. And thank you for joining us today for the 253rd episode of the PR Maven podcast.
Wow. Okay.
So have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.